Today we are going to be doing an NFL tier list with my personal opinions on how the quarterbacks finished out the year. Let's get into this one. So we are going to be kind of rating these guys off of a few categories, going from top to bottom. We have the MVP caliber players. These are probably the best QBs in the league. Top 10, pretty good quarterbacks. We have the average and the mid tier, some guys that are all right. Then we have the signs of good but are not there yet type of guys that probably are on the younger side. We have a group for what the WTF? What happened to these guys? They were probably good at some point in their career. Now they're just straight up ass. Then we have the pretty bad. Not the worst, but not the best. And then we have awful, which is going to be like the worst QBs in the league. So, of course, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe before we get started. Alright, so our first guy we have is Drake Maye. Now, Drake Maye put together a pretty decent rookie season. For not starting the first couple of games, I felt like he finished out his season pretty well. The Patriots were pretty ass, I'm not going to lie. It'll be interesting to see how a new head coach in Mike Vrabel will kind of develop him. Mike Vrabel's been good with QBs in the past. But I'm interested to see kind of what happens here. And I think, here is kind of the signs of good, but he's not there yet. I mean, you can tell he's going to be a decent QB once he does play, but obviously he's just not developed yet. And I mean, this is kind of where I'm going to try to place most of the rookies that had themselves a decent first year, because obviously they're not fully developed, and it's kind of hard to, fully rank them of how I would overall. Next up, we have Jared Goff, who was actually an MVP finalist, and he capped a pretty good season with the Lions. Now, don't get me wrong, he had some pretty good guys around him, but he's overall he's just a decent QB. I'm going to have to put him in the average and mid category. I don't really think he's a top 10 QB in the NFL. He had a pretty good season this year, but overall, I just don't really think he's there yet. Next up, we have Justin Herbert, who also put together an okay season. He led the Chargers to the playoffs, but honestly, it wasn't a good season for him, and he's really just shown how he's a decent QB in the NFL, but I don't really think he's reached the point where we could argue that he's a top 10 QB and he's doing astronomical things. He just isn't really there yet as a player, although I do think that Jim Harbaugh is going to be able to kind of figure things out with him and get him to that category within the next few seasons. Next up, we have Brock Purdy, and I'm not going to lie, I don't really know what happened with him and the 49ers team this year. I know injuries kind of stocked up along the way, but Brock Purdy, like the last 2-3 years, it looked like he was actually a decent QB from being the last pick in the NFL draft to leading a team to a Super Bowl. I thought he was a top 10 QB in the NFL for sure. People could make that argument. But this year, I don't know what the F happened to him, all right? Like, he's literally defining this category. I came up with this category because of guys like him. I'm not really sure what happened with him. I know injuries were a big issue, but the 49ers did not look good at all this year, regardless of injury. And even when they had some of their guys healthy, they honestly just looked like a pretty shit team, and they didn't even make the playoffs. That's exactly where I'm at with him. Next up, we have Josh Allen. I don't really think there's any debate for this. He's an MVP caliber type of guy, and he honestly put together an insane season. Considering the fact that he really just didn't have much guys around him, people thought the Bills weren't going to be good. He beat all those odds and led this team to the AFC Championship. Unfortunately, they could not get the job done, but he clearly is an MVP caliber QB, and it's, in my opinion, a top 3, top 5 guy in the league. Next up, we have Joe Burrow, and I'm going to place him in the top 10 because I don't really think that he's MVP caliber with the way that the team performed this season. Honestly, this could be very debatable, and I'm not going to lie, I could get flamed for this in the comments. He's a very good QB, but he has very good weapons around him, and I just kind of want to see the way he leads a team that doesn't, guys like Jamar Chase aren't playing sometimes. I'm really yet to kind of see that. They built really, really well around him. But they didn't make the playoffs. That's the thing for me is they started off the season really rough. They've lost to the Patriots week 1. I mean, you could really go either way with, I'm tempted to put him in here. I'm tempted to put him in here. I don't really know. He was an MVP finalist. But I think right now I'm going to put him in top 10 based off the way that their season ended. Flame me in the comments if you want. Next up, we have Aaron Rodgers. And I'm not going to lie, dude, if there was a retire category on here, I'm putting it here. He was nearly awful this season. I'm going to put him in the pretty bad just because at the end of the day, he's still an MVP QB. Just he's getting old. You can't really blame him. But with the team he had around him, they should have made the playoffs. There's no excuse. You have Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, three very good playmakers right there, and somehow they didn't even sniff the playoffs. I really don't understand that. Should have never fired Robert Saleh. He kind of set him up for failure, although the guys around him set him up for success, and he really just couldn't get the job done. Next up, we have Will Levis, and honestly, after watching Will Levis play this season, his decision making, like, it honestly made me question, like, if I was, like, even, like, watching the game correctly, because, like, I don't even know what he was doing half the time. He is an awful quarterback. If the Titans don't take a QB in this year's draft, I really don't know what they're thinking, because I'm not gonna lie, he looked horrendously bad this year. And I really just don't think that they should even give him another year. I mean, if you want to bench him, you could. If you want to start him, that's one thing, if they want to run that route again. But honestly, he was an awful QB in the league. Bottom 5, in my opinion, for a starter. Just horrendously bad. Next up, we have Daniel Jones, and I guess he's not even on the Giants anymore. He just had a pretty bad season, and I kind of feel bad for the dude. He got paid a huge contract, just didn't really play his best. And the team was honestly a shit show, although I do think with Malik Neighbors on the team that he definitely should have been able to be a little bit better. That got him that weapon that he's finally been able to look for. Theo Johnson also wasn't a bad ball catcher. I think that he'll try to get a fresh start somewhere. He definitely should maybe get a starting job next year depending on injuries and stuff like that. And I definitely think he'll sniff the field sometime next season. But honestly, just a pretty bad season from him. He was just pretty bad. By the way, if I haven't made this clear, I'm trying to base this off this year's season and kind of like the past few seasons of their career, but especially this season. Next up, we have Trevor Lawrence, and he's going to be in the what the fuck happened category just because he really like started off his career looking pretty promising. Doug Peterson came in. He had a decent few seasons with them. And then like this year, it was just like what happened? I know he was injured for half the time, but when he was playing, he honestly just looked like a shit show. And I'm not exactly sure like what got into him. They're definitely going to need to have a huge offseason with him and get him back to where he used to be because he's in the what the F happened category. And if I'm me, I don't really think you want to be there. Next up, we have Derek Carr, another guy that was injured, and he's a mid QB, but he was pretty bad this year. The Saints started off the season pretty well. Actually, I'm moving up to average/mid just because the Saints started off the season pretty well. When he was playing, he looked decent. He was dealing with some injuries, so the mistakes he made, I can kind of blame on that. But overall, I think he's a decent QB in the NFL, and he's kind of proven that throughout his career. And when he was playing, I thought he was decent. The Saints started the season hot. Yeah. Kirk Cousins was awful. What the fuck happened? I don't even know what happened to him. I honestly don't even know what happened to him. Like, genuinely, what happened to him? What happened to him? I mean, they signed $30 million a year, and he got benched in like week 13 or something. What happened to this dude? Honestly, I really don't know, to be honest. And they can't cut his contract, so he's really just gonna have to sit behind Michael Penix. And as a veteran QB that has had some decent success in the NFL, that is really bad. You're in the what the F happened category. Next up, we have Baker Mayfield, and surprisingly enough, I'll put him in the top 10 QB. I really do think that he showed that he developed into a good QB, and he can lead the Bucs to be pretty dirty as long as Mike Evans is on the team. I think Todd Bowles did a decent job with him, but I mean, he had 4,500 passing yards, and I mean, like 3 years ago, this dude was literally like 10-day contracts in the NBA to the guy in the NFL. He was like sleeping in hotels every night because he didn't know where he was going the next day. And he really, really showed why he's a top 10 QB. And if you want to argue with me in the comments. If you're saying Jared Goff's not a top 10 QB, but Baker Mayfield is, let me know what you guys think in the comment. Bo Nix is another guy I'm gonna have to kind of put in the signs of good, but not there yet. I honestly think you could argue that he's in the mid, like in this, he's nearing that category. I thought he put together a pretty good rookie campaign considering what people thought of the Broncos going into the season. Sean Payton did a really good job with him, and I'm very, very excited to see what he does in his sophomore season. Next up, we have Sam Darnold, and I really do think that Sam Darnold, at the end of the day, is still a mid QB. He put together a very good campaign, but when it mattered most, he kind of failed, and he was pretty sluggish. So I'm going to have to put him in the mid category, although I do think that he should definitely be getting paid at least like $15 million a year somewhere, because he's a decent QB at the end of the day, and he's going to be able to lead your team to at least the playoffs. We saw it this year, and I got to give big props to Kevin O'Connell for developing into who he is today. Next, we have Matthew Stafford. Again, I think he's a top 10 QB in the NFL. I think it's kind of hard to argue. And I really do think, looking at it now, you could really argue that Jared Goff is a top 10 QB as well. But I think Matthew Stafford, overall, throughout his career, has been pretty dominant. And to this day, he just looks very good. He's able to drive down the field and score, like, on, I would say, 60% of the time I see him play. In the Rams game, the Eagles play, I genuinely thought we were going to lose because Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay together in the 2-minute drill is just, it's really hard to stop. And this dude's still passing for 4,000 yards, and he's like 34, 35 now. I mean, props to him. He's definitely a top 10 QB in my eyes. Next up, Zach Wilson is on this list, and he's just pretty bad. I mean, he didn't really play at all, but I'm just going to put him in the pretty bad category because I feel like if he actually gets his chance somewhere with Sean Payton, he honestly could be an okay QB, and I think that he could definitely show signs of decency, but I really just think he hasn't been in that mindset. He hasn't really gotten his chance anywhere, and I think if Sean Payton ever does give him a chance, if they're in a spot where they need to rest their starters or Bo Nix is hurt, he should definitely be the guy that they look to because I honestly think in the right system and with the right coach, he could be okay in the NFL. Next up, we have Patrick Mahomes, and another guy I'm going to throw in the top 10. Obviously, Mahomes is very good. He isn't an MVP finalist. I don't really think that his stats show MVP caliber. I just think he knows how to play in the NFL, and he knows especially what he's doing, which is going to give props to because he makes everything look so easy. But he still makes costly mistakes. He still throws interceptions. He's not perfect. I don't think he's an MVP guy like Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen are this year, but I really do think that he is a very good QB in the NFL. And I mean, what he's done with the Chiefs is really crazy. They have a chance to make history in this upcoming weekend. Next up, we have Caleb Williams, and I'm not going to lie. I'm going to throw, you could say he had a pretty bad season, but I'm going to have to throw him in the signs of good, but not there yet, because, again, this is mainly going to be for the rookies, but I honestly think that he showed signs that he knows what he's doing. The coaches failed him, and, from the head coach being fired, that shitty clock management. I mean, there was times where you would watch the Bears game, Caleb Williams would just, be like, what is going on? Like, genuinely, what is going on with this team? Their coaches failed him. I'm not going to lie. The O-line failed him. They didn't really set him up for success. But I genuinely think that he could be a top 10 QB in the next 2 years if he figures out and the front office figures out how to build around him correctly. Next up, we have Deshaun Watson. Again, he's just awful. Ever since those allegations were put up against him, he hasn't looked the same. And somehow he still got paid a lot of money by the Browns, and they restructured his contract a little bit. But bottom line, he's an ass QB. I think he'll, just because of his name and before the allegations, he was a decent QB. And teams are probably going to give him a chance. It's still Deshaun Watson, but I think he's pretty awful. This season was awful for him. Season-ending injury as well. I mean, he's just gotten unlucky and has been questionable. Next up, we have CJ Stroud. Welcome to the What the F Happened to You category. The sophomore slump is real in the NFL. CJ Stroud defined the definition of the sophomore slump this year. The Texans, at the end of the day, Joe Mixon kind of saved his job. Not saved his job, but kind of saved their season in some ways. I mean, his legs really helped him. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'll give it to him. He was throwing to different receivers each week. But I mean, again, he just didn't look as good. He made a lot of turnovers, a lot of interceptions. Just wasn't as good of a season from him, and I know what he's capable of. And they couldn't really get past. They didn't look like they ever had a chance in that Chiefs game. Just not a good season for him, and I don't really know what happened. Bryce Young, another guy, he's in his sophomore season. Signs good, but not there yet. He's not a rookie, but, I mean, dude, when they gave him a chance with the right coach, with the right pieces around him, I think Bryce Young can be a really decent QB in the NFL. I know he's short. A lot of guys are questioning his abilities, but, I mean, you looked at him the last few weeks of the season, he looked pretty good. I mean, he nearly beat the Chiefs. He beat the Giants in Germany. That was, the first win that, kind of ramped up his season. But I ought to say, I'm really rooting for this guy. I think a lot of people want him to succeed. And he really showed that he could be a decent QB when he gets the right guys around him. And I really do think that Adam Thielen helped a lot with his development because that's a veteran ball catcher that he had. And he was able to get the ball to him. And it just helped him, figure out his targets, figure out his accuracy, and just get him to be a decent QB, which we saw signs of. Next up, we have Russell Wilson, and he's going to be in, the pretty bad category, retire, mid. I mean, I'm gonna kind of toss him in mid. I think it's still Russell Wilson, but unfortunately, I mean, the age is getting to him, and we've seen it in a lot of these guys throughout their careers. We've just seen that they're starting to get old, and it's unfortunate because they've had a lot of success, but unfortunately that collapse that the Steelers had is just kind of it's undefinable, and it really starts with him. I kind of think Justin Fields should have had a shot there in the last few weeks. You knew you guys weren't winning games. You should have thrown him in there. It's unfortunate, but that's kind of how the NFL goes. Next up, we have Kyler Murray, and he's also going to go in the average/mid category. I mean, he's shown that he's a decent QB in the NFL at best. I don't really think he's sniffing top 10 yet, but I think he's a pretty good quarterback, and he's shown decent signs of success throughout his career with the Cardinals. Unfortunately, I just think he makes kind of dumb mistakes and isn't really there, but I do think his legs are a very good feature on him. Next up, we have Joe Flacco. Pretty bad season from him. I mean, him and Anthony Richardson were kind of trading off starting jobs in the first half of the season. When he was playing, he was all right. Not the worst, not the best, but he was pretty bad. And I think, dude, he should just retire. You won a Super Bowl, call it a day. Next up, we have Sam Howell, another guy that didn't really play, but he's just on this tier list. So I'm just going to put him in the pretty bad category. These are just guys who I didn't really get a chance to see much of, so I can't really necessarily determine a ranking for them. Same thing with guys like Bailey Zappi, and I'm also going to throw J.J. McCarthy in there too because he didn't play at all this season. But everybody else has played at least in the season, so that's where I'm going to get to next. Next up, we have Aiden O'Connell, another guy that was just pretty awful. I mean, dude, the Raiders are such a joke this year. Gardner Minshew to start the season, ended with Aiden O'Connell. I really hope that they can find their guy in the draft. I honestly, after watching Jalen Milroe in the Senior Bowl, I'm not really sure if it's going to be him, but I do think that they'll find their guy eventually. But I mean, it was just a pretty bad season for them in general, and it didn't really help putting Aiden O'Connell in that situation. Next up, we have Justin Fields, and I'm going to put him in the mid. Signs are good, but not there yet category, just because I think when he does play, he's a decent quarterback. Okay? Don't get, I know, call me crazy, but he was honestly not looking too bad last year with the Bears. Then they decided that they were going to start fresh, which I don't fully understand. I think Caleb Williams is a very good quarterback when he gets his chance, but I don't really understand the process behind that. They kind of set him up for failure, but I've seen signs of good. He's not there yet, but I mean, start off the season with the Steelers, he looked pretty good. They're going to give the job to Russell Wilson just because he's a vet and he's more experienced, and that's kind of what Mike Tomlin led to at the end of the day. But I honestly do think that Justin Fields is going to be there soon, just not there yet, and he's shown his signs of success early on in his career. He's still young, so I mean, it's not over for him yet. He's kind of Baker Mayfield in a way. Tua, another mid quarterback. I mean, these names, you can't really argue that they had pretty bad seasons or not. I think he was a mid season from him. I do think that they kind of need to get their shit together over there. And I do think that, his injuries kind of got to him a little bit because his decision making looked a little off. But I mean, Mike McDaniel, I think he's a funny coach. I think he's good to have in the locker room. Don't get me wrong. But I mean, at the end of the day, he doesn't win those big games for them. And I really do think that the front office has to look at that. And, not look at his comedy and more look at, the reason he's there. Because it's to win. And they haven't really done that. And Tua hasn't really helped that either. Next up, we have Geno Smith, another mid quarterback in the NFL. He wasn't really, able to get his... he wasn't able to, necessarily show exactly, how decent of a quarterback he was this year. They missed out on the playoffs, but I think he put together a solid year. When your team's okay, you're okay too. I mean, it kind of matches up hand in hand in my opinion, because I think he was decent enough to the point where I can put him in this category, but I don't really think he had a top 10 type of season. Next up, we have Jaden Daniels, so I'm going to have to throw into the top 10 here. Early on, I know it's crazy considering, he's a rookie quarterback, but he honestly showed, how good of a quarterback he was, in my opinion. I really do think that his composure, his passing rating as a rookie being fourth best is very, very crazy. He led them to an NFC championship in year number 1. That just kind of shows, he's a top 10 quarterback in my mind, and I really, it's kind of hard to argue with it just because he really backed himself up, and I do think he's going to win Offensive Rookie of the Year. Go check out the video, put it up right now, but go check it out as I discuss my award predictions. Jaden Daniels, I'll just spoil it, was my Offensive Rookie of the Year pick, and I think he's a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. Next up, we have Jordan Love, and I'm also going to have to throw him in the top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL. I know this is kind of controversial, but I do think that Jordan Love, learning from Aaron Rodgers, definitely helped him out a lot. And I think that Matt LaFleur is a decent play caller. He looked pretty good. Unfortunately, their last few weeks of they lost in the wild card. They couldn't get the job done. But I mean, it's kind of like his first experience there. And I honestly think Josh Jacobs was a beautiful signee. And if you kind of develop guys like Jaden Reed and Romeo Doubs and decent receivers, maybe get another veteran guy that's going to come in there and help, because I don't really think, you have too many like mid-young guys, Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks. The receiving room is a little too crowded for him. I think he needs to get a veteran ball catcher in, and I do think he's going to be a pretty good quarterback. I do think he's top 10 right now, probably at like the last spot, maybe 10, but I do think he's a top 10 quarterback. Next up, we have Dak Prescott, and I'm going to throw him in the top 10 range, average mid, because I do think when he plays his top 10, he's very good QB when he does play. He honestly, I'm scared to play him next year. I mean, the Cowboys are probably going to be pretty shit, but him and CeeDee Lamb are a scary duo, and I know he didn't play this season, but I genuinely do think that this guy is top 10, and you can argue with the wall. Michael Penix didn't really get a lot of chances as a rookie, but when he did play, signs are good, but not there yet. I mean, it's a young offense around them. I think give it 2 years, they'll be a pretty good team, and he'll be definitely developed into like a pretty good average QB in the NFL. But I just don't think he really got enough chance, got put in a weird situation. And if they name him their day one starter next year, I really do think next year is going to be a huge growth year to his development. Now we have Anthony Richardson. I mean, I don't really know what happened to him. I thought he was a decent QB when he first entered the league. But, I mean, just not, it's not there as much as he thought it would be anymore. And he kind of, one of the worst passing, I think he's the worst passing rating in the NFL this season. And this is going to end you up in the what the F happened type of category, because the Colts are a decent team. I mean, you look at their roster, they should be a solid 8-9 win team at the end of the day, but they just looked pretty awful this year. And I think they got to get back in the playoffs if he's going to be their guy next year. Next up, my Philadelphia Eagles quarterback, Jalen Hurts. I really do think he's a top 10 quarterback. People have hated him on in the media so much, and I don't see why. He's literally backed up everything this season that people have hated him on for. He has led the Eagles to the Super Bowl for the second time in 3 years, and somehow people are saying he's not good. I mean, I don't see... Patrick Mahomes is the only other guy to really do that here, but people are saying he's worse than half the guys I've named in the average and mid category, and I don't understand the hate behind him. I know I might be a little biased, but I really don't understand the hate, and I think people in the Super Bowl, if they win it, it'll show why he's a top 10 quarterback, and I don't really think this one's really up for debate that much. People are going to argue with it just because they want to argue and they want to hate on Philly sports. That's all the media shapes, but this is one thing I will honestly talk about for hours on hours about how he is a top 10 quarterback, and I don't really think it's that close. And last but not least, Lamar Jackson's obviously an MVP caliber quarterback. There's nothing really I got to say there. That's pretty obvious. As he led the Ravens to AFC divisional round and MVP finalist. Literally says it right there. But thank you guys so much for watching. Of course, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you are new. Let me know if you guys are changed anything. I know that there definitely could be some controversy between the mid and the top 10. This is personally just what I think. And let me know if you guys want to see more tier lists. I'm cool to do some receivers, running backs, teams going into next season, how I feel just early on, stuff like that. Just let me know. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. And of course, I'll see you guys in the next one.